Over 1,500 people died on the Titanic, but this video isn't about them. It's about something much weirder. It's about the people who survived and then vanished. These are the absolute strangest stories of the survivors of the Titanic who went missing after being saved. Number 7. Not all of the Titanic's poorest passengers slept in third-class cabins. Some, like 33-year-old Sarah Daniels from London, stayed with their wealthy employers in luxurious upper-deck cabins. Sarah was a maid for the Allison family, millionaires from Canada. Husband Hudson, wife Bess, and their 2 infant children, Lorraine and Trevor. Hudson had made his fortune in the family brokerage firm in Montreal. In business circles, they were known as the Methodist Mafia for being devout Christians, but Hudson, or Hud to his friends, was certainly no criminal. He also traveled a lot to England and Scotland as a board member for the British Lumber Corporation. And that's how he ended up playing a starring role in the world's worst travel story. And he brought along his British domestic staff: George Swain, chauffeur; Mildred Brown, family cook; Alice Cleaver, nursemaid for baby Trevor; and Sarah, Bess's lady's maid. HUD paid £151, 16 shillings for a first-class family ticket, covering 3 adjoining upper-deck cabins for himself, Bess, their children, nurse Alice, and maid Sarah, about $23,000 in 2025. Even second-class tickets weren't cheap. For George and Mildred, HUD paid roughly £13 to £15 each, about $1,800 to $2,200 in today's money. But all the money in the world couldn't protect them. When the Titanic hit the iceberg at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, Nurse Alice grabbed Trevor and rushed toward Lifeboat 11. Bess, who had spent the evening socializing amongst business royalty in first class, was gripped by panic. She didn't know where Alice and Trevor were. She also had no idea where Hudson was. At one point, she and 2-year-old Lorraine were safely in Lifeboat 6, but she couldn't leave without the family. And that's when she made the worst mistake of her life. She dragged Lorraine out from the safety of the boat and went in search of her husband and son. Someone told her that Hudson was on the opposite side of the ship, so she ran across the deck with Lorraine in her arms. But amidst the chaos, whistles blowing, officers shouting, there was no sign of them. She had no choice now but to try to get her and Lorraine onto one of the collapsible boats, but as they attempted to climb in, both were swept into the freezing water. They were dead within minutes. Lifeboat 6 set sail with just 24 people aboard for its 65-person capacity. Meanwhile, Hudson, who had no idea he had just lost his wife and daughter, was also swept into the North Atlantic and died. Alice and Trevor survived. Mildred, the British cook, despite refusing to get out of bed when the ship hit the iceberg, also survived. As for the chauffeur George, he was a man with a lower-class ticket, so the next time the people said his name, it came with the letters RIP. Like Alice, Sarah didn't at first take to the warning seriously, climbing back into bed after being told there was an emergency. The screaming and shouting changed her mind, and soon she was in Lifeboat 16. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The boat was barely half empty, yet people were being left behind. After taking part in initial interviews, her name was scrubbed from history. No address, no photos, no employment record, nothing. It's not even certain her real name was Sarah Daniels. Her vanishing act is a story with no end, which is almost the same for this next survivor, but he purposefully erased his name from the pages of history. Number 6. Wing Sung Fong, listed as Fang Lang when he boarded the Titanic, was just 18. Born into abject poverty in Imperial China, he was one of 8 Chinese passengers who boarded in Southampton, England. They shared the same third-class ticket at a cost of over £56, about $1,300 each in 2025. But the men weren't tourists. Their journey was an arrangement that would take them to work as sailors on another ship once they reached New York. They could never have imagined that their story would go down in history. In the inquiry that followed the disaster, testimony stated that 4 of the men rushed into collapsible sea, hiding amongst the women and children. An officer testified that he'd have shot the men, but he didn't want to hit any of the other passengers. 2 of the men died, 6 survived, including Fang Lang. His rescue was the direct inspiration for the character Rose in the movie Titanic. Second-class passenger Charlotte Caroline Collier said she was in Lifeboat 14 when she saw him lying face down on a door floating in the water. He wasn't moving. Cold waves washed over him, his body seemingly almost frozen. When some of the women suggested they try to rescue him, Officer Harold Godfrey Lowe told them, "What's the point?" But thankfully, Lowe changed his mind. They turned back and they picked him up. The women revived him. Within 5 minutes, he was moving and talking. The young man then picked up an oar and started rowing like his life depended on it. Officer Lowe admitted that the little blighter might actually be of some use. In New York, the Chinese survivors were taken by U.S. immigration and detained. Chinese people were barred from the U.S. at the time under the Chinese Exclusion Act, but the men were soon allowed to sail to Cuba. The men's names were vilified in the U.S. media in what was a time of rampant anti-Chinese sentiment. Newspapers referred to them as creatures who had selfishly jumped into the lifeboat, some even dressing in women's clothes. It wasn't all true, but the shame was enough for Fang Lang and his friends to keep their Titanic story a secret. None of them were heard from in decades, and then in the 21st century, the tale of Fang Lang, actually Wing Sun Fong, came back to life. Fong had spent 6 years after the disaster working as a fruit freighter in the Caribbean and later working on ships out of France. In 1920, he immigrated to the U.S., where he opened a laundromat in Chicago, and then worked as a waiter in Milwaukee. He became a U.S. citizen in 1956, and he went on to become a well-known figure in Chicago's Chinese community. But he never, ever talked about the Titanic, not even to his own family. It was almost 2 decades after he died in 1986, at the age of 91, that one of his sons did some research online and discovered that the passenger Fang Lang was in fact his father. His story is one of discrimination in a world where the poor were often viewed as innately inferior. That's one of the reasons why some of the Titanic's passengers were locked behind barred gates when the ship started to sink. And this is where things start to get really crazy. Number 5. 26-year-old Irish domestic servant Annie Jane German paid £7.15, about $1,300 in 2025, for a third-class trip to the United States. And for a woman in third class, the odds of survival were grim. Of 179 women, 91 died. It was even worse for the children. 55 out of 80 third-class children did not make it. As for the men, they were practically sentenced to death. There were 450 third-class men, and only 59 survived to tell the story. Annie was one of the lucky ones. Like other lower-class passengers, she had boarded the Titanic through a special entrance where the passengers were checked for diseases. Her simple cabin was a far cry from the upper decks, where businessmen, socialites, and aristocracy enjoyed Turkish baths and a state-of-the-art gym. Their a la carte restaurants served foie gras, filet mignon, and Waldorf pudding, while in third class they made do with rabbit pie, bread and butter, and finished off with cheap cigarettes and a game of dominoes. Even if the passengers in third class tried to sneak in and see how the other half lived, they wouldn't have been able to get through the locked gates onto the deck. That meant that when the ship started to take on water, they were trapped. Passengers like Annie were running frantically up and down the corridors trying to find a way out. Some of them managed to get to the second-class promenade, where their lifeboats were, but they still faced iron grills and locks. As women protected their children, fights broke out between the men. Some just accepted their fate and they went back to the cabins to die. But not Annie. When the gates were still locked and passengers were pounding their fists against them, she climbed over and sprinted to a boat deck. There was no time to think. She just jumped, falling into a lifeboat and seriously injuring her stomach. She later testified that she then felt a kick to the back, and when she looked up, there was a man staring at her. Maybe she wasn't welcome in this boat. But then she heard a gunshot and the man fell into the water. Someone obviously had her back. Annie's destination was her sister's house in Massachusetts. After recovering in the hospital from her injured stomach, that is where she went, but after that, she vanished. She met a man her parents didn't approve of, became estranged from her family, and didn't even attend her mother's funeral. But for a story of love gone sour on the Titanic, this next one is the best. Number 4. American Eleanor Genevieve Casimir was 36 and staying in first class when her life was changed forever. When she boarded the Titanic in 1912, she was a woman trying to start over again. Her first marriage to Louis Peake in the late 1890s collapsed almost as soon as it began. Just after the birth of their child, Peake turned into a compulsive gambler and a heavy drinker. Eleanor stitched embroidery late into the night to keep the household afloat, while her husband drank himself senseless. Eventually, she filed for divorce, won custody of the child, and made herself a vow next time she would marry a man with a future. Long hours of sewing and single motherhood left her with a constant pain in her arm, but that changed her fate. It brought her into contact with Dr. Henry Casimir. Casimir was everything Peake was not: wealthy, cultured, well-connected. His mother came from the Steinway piano family. His father owned a pharmaceutical firm. He adored Eleanor's beauty and called her Guinevere. She called him Arthur. He seemed perfect. When they married in 1909, Eleanor believed her years of struggle were well and truly over. But shortly after she opened her own manicure business in New York, Henry broke off the relationship for another woman. Only when Eleanor agreed to close her new business and devote herself entirely to him did he return. They moved into a luxurious Midtown Manhattan apartment costing $333 a month, over $10,000 today. Their monthly lifestyle ran close to $1,000, the modern equivalent of more than $30,000. Yet, money didn't bring peace. Arguments became constant, especially after Henry lost a fortune gambling on the stock market. He blamed shadowy financial gains on Wall Street. Eleanor blamed his recklessness, all the time reminded that her first husband was also a gambler, just a different kind of gambler. And then came the affairs. One morning, Eleanor walked into their bedroom and found a smiling Irish servant girl, Catherine, in her bed. She was fired immediately. Eleanor later confronted Catherine, and Catherine confirmed the truth: she and Henry had slept together. Arguments erupted, threats followed. Henry warned Eleanor he could slip powerful medicines onto her tongue while she slept. He could have her committed to an asylum. But by 1911, they had signed a separation agreement. As the innocent party, Eleanor demanded $200 a month in alimony, about $6,500 today. She wasn't going to go back to living in poverty. Her son was now grown and studying in France. Eleanor herself was there when word reached her that Henry was apparently gravely ill. And that is why she boarded the Titanic at Cherbourg on April 10, 1912, intending to see just how sick her husband really was. She hadn't planned to sail on the world's most famous ship. Again, fate stepped in and put her there. Originally, the plan was to buy a modest second-class ticket. With just £5 in hand, she approached the ship's purser, Hugh Walter McElroy. Moved by her dire circumstances and irresistible charm, McElroy upgraded her to first class. She found herself dining amongst the financiers and power brokers, seated beside the wealthy American stockbroker Harry Anderson. They wined, they dined, they danced in the gilded ballroom. Eleanor had been returned to the lap of luxury. But fate wasn't finished with her just yet. When the Titanic struck the iceberg, she was alone in her cabin. She left to investigate and soon found Anderson. McElroy instructed them to fetch warm clothing and life jackets. There was no panic at first, not until Eleanor returned to her cabin and felt the ship pitching forward. Now frightened, she reunited with Anderson and made for the boat deck. And that's where they parted, women and children first. Eleanor was lowered in Lifeboat 5 at 12:28 a.m. and later rescued by the Carpathia. As she sat listening to the other ladies talking about how much jewelry they had lost, who should turn up but Mr. Anderson? What happened to her after would take years of research. It was eventually discovered she had spent years locked in bitter legal battles with Henry over alimony. He'd claimed that she had succeeded in ruining him. Judges disagreed. In 1927, he was ordered to pay her $150 a month. He then claimed financial ruin again and cut the payments to just $50. He later cut her off completely before dying in 1941. His fortune almost wiped out. Eleanor returned to sewing day and night, her bad arm a source of constant agony. She drifted New York, California, London, resurfacing briefly in 1958, attending the New York premiere of A Night to Remember, a film about the Titanic. Then she vanished again. There is no confirmed death date, not even an obituary. She was last known to be living in a cheap Manhattan rooming house. Sometime around 1969 or 1970, she likely died quietly. Her remaining family were never notified. If there was a funeral, it was modest and unrecorded. A woman who had once danced in the Titanic's grand ballroom, who dined with captains of industry and wore the finest clothes, finished life mending garments on a New York City bench. Let's turn now to one of the most controversial survival stories of the Titanic, that of the ship's only Japanese passenger. Number 3. Masabumi Hosono was fluent in Russian and had been working in the country on behalf of the Japanese Ministry of Transport. On his journey home to Japan, he stopped first in London, a decision that put him on the Titanic. When the ship struck an iceberg, 42-year-old Hosono left his cabin to investigate. Like most passengers, he didn't think the ship would go down. He made his way toward the boat deck only to be stopped by a steward who ordered him away. The steward, looking at Hosono's Asian appearance, assumed that he was a third-class passenger, and he told him he had no right to be on the deck. As things went from bad to worse, Hosono went back to the deck, all the while consumed by the thought that he might never see his wife and children again. He helped women and children board Lifeboat 13, but as it was being lowered, he noticed that 2 spaces remained empty. He jumped into one. Hosono was unfamiliar with Western maritime protocol. He was terrified, but it was a decision he would regret for the rest of his life. By the time he was wrapped in a blanket on the Carpathia, people weeping around him searching for their loved ones, he was steeped in shame. And in Japan, nothing could be worse for a man than to live in shame. His survival became a national scandal. To a society bound to the ideas of honor and sacrifice, the only Japanese man aboard the Titanic had done the unthinkable. He had lived. Newspapers denounced him as a coward who should have died honorably in accordance with the samurai codes. American newspapers didn't hold back either. They talked about how brave Western men had gone down with the ship, while this cowardly stowaway had sneaked into a lifeboat. In Japan, Hosono was subjected to mura hachibu, a form of social ostracism. Hate mail arrived at his door daily. Strangers in the street would walk up to him and tell him that he should have died, that he had disgraced his nation. His story even became a topic in high school education. Textbooks used him as an example of dishonor. He lived in shame until he died in 1939, even after Japanese media cited him as an example of how a man shouldn't live. Well, at least he got to see his wife and 4 kids again. They still loved him even if the world did not. That is a sad story. But this next guy, he had it even worse than Hosono. Number 2. For the Titanic sailor James Forward, a family life was never in the cards. There is no record of his birth, but it's believed he might have been born in Portsmouth, England in 1884, making him 27 years old when he took a job as an able seaman on the Titanic. With tattoos of eagles and swords and attractive women marking his scarred body, James didn't seem to care so much about convention. He lived for the day, staying in a sailor's home in Southampton when on dry land, but working mostly at sea for £5 a month, around $930 to $1,000 today. About 76% of the crew died on the Titanic, but James managed to get a place on Lifeboat 16. After that, he disappeared from history. Research later showed that soon after the Titanic, he was back working on ships, spending some time in prison when docked in New Zealand after being accused of using foul language. He settled in Australia, where his life on the high seas continued until 1940, when working on the SS Aruna, he mysteriously disappeared about 22 miles off the coast of Victoria. Sailors don't generally fall off of ships. Had his foul mouth gotten him in trouble with his crew? No one knew, but it looked like poor old James might have taken matters into his own hands. James survived the Titanic, but his life of hard knocks and loneliness may have caught up with him. He went out as he came in, unwanted, unloved. And this next passenger, well, she had too much love. Love that almost killed her. A sad story with a happy ending. Number 1. Elizabeth Ann Wilkinson. Lizzie, to her friends in Manchester, England, was 30 when she paid £26, about $5,000 today, for the trip of a lifetime on the Titanic. But how did a working-class girl from industrial England afford such an extravagant trip? Or more importantly, why was a working-class girl heading to the US when she had a working-class husband at home? All was not as it seemed. Lizzie had absconded. With no children in her marriage to her husband Samuel, it seems that she decided to take her chances across the pond with a new lover. His name was Harry Bartram Faunthorpe, a successful furniture salesman from the town of Grimsby. When they boarded the Titanic at Southampton, they did so as husband and wife. Lizzie told all the ladies that she was on her honeymoon, heading to the beaches of California. Born into poverty, she was suddenly a woman of leisure. When the ship collided with the iceberg, Lizzie was at first afraid to jump into one of the frail-looking lifeboats, but when an officer brandishing a gun told her that fear wasn't an option, she jumped in, her fake husband Harry waving goodbye. The newspapers in England reported that her companion, Mr. Faunthorpe, wasn't so lucky. He went down with the ship. His body later recovered with about $1,000 worth of jewelry. That's between $180,000 and $195,000 in 2025. At least the newspapers in England saved her from eternal embarrassment by reporting that she had been going to visit relatives in Philadelphia. Like so many other survivors, Lizzie spent weeks in a state of shock, but she wasn't going to take her suffering lying down. She sued the White Star Line for $10,000 for the loss of her husband. The American Red Cross discovered her lie, and they told the world she'd been cavorting with a lover while her real husband was nursing his tears at home in Manchester. The only thing we know after that is that Samuel took her back. Yes, you heard that right. But whether they lived happily ever after is unknown. Now go check out what happened to your body if you fell off the Titanic into the freezing water, or click on this video instead.